Welcome to The Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're getting into something that might literally be on your wrist right now, or has definitely influenced health data you've seen. We're exploring the surprisingly complex world of assessing physical activity using accelerometers.
That's right. These little devices are everywhere now.
Exactly. Your smartwatch tracking steps, maybe a fitness monitor for a work challenge, or even a research-grade one if you've been in a study. They're ubiquitous. But here's the big question scientists grapple with. You've got all these different devices, people wear them differently, the data gets crunched through countless algorithms. How on earth do you compare results from one study to another?
How do we know if, say, active minutes measured by one device actually mean the same thing as active minutes from a completely different study using different tech?
That's the core challenge, and it's why we're doing this deep dive. Raw accelerometry data, the basic wiggle information, is becoming really foundational for physical activity research. But the sheer variety, different sensor designs, different ways they're strapped on, different ways the signals get processed, it creates this huge headache for comparability.
It really does. It's almost like everyone's speaking a slightly different dialect of the same language.
Yeah, which makes having a truly universal scientific conversation incredibly difficult.
And what's fascinating, I think, is that while so many of us use these things daily, the scientific community faces this really fundamental problem, just making sure the steps or activity minutes reported are actually comparable. This deep dive, really, it's about understanding the huge effort going into bringing some consistency to all that data, moving beyond just numbers to consistent insights.
And the story of this effort, a lot of it is captured in a really key 2016 paper. It's called Challenges and Opportunities for Harmonizing Research Methodology, Raw Accelerometry. And it wasn't just one person's idea. It actually came out of a 2-day workshop back in March 2014. They brought together a whole mix of experts.
A real cross-section. You had people from the companies actually building the sensors, the algorithm developers, the researchers using them in the field.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to unpack why this harmonization is so critical, what specific roadblocks are in the way, and maybe most importantly, the practical, actionable steps these experts came up with to make accelerometer data more consistent and, ultimately more trustworthy. So where should we start this unraveling? I think it begins with a pretty fundamental shift in how scientists even collect this data now. What's the deal with raw accelerometry becoming the standard?
Yeah, that's a great place to begin. Raw accelerometry basically means collecting the acceleration data itself in its purest form, usually in units like g-force or meters per second squared. And crucially, it's collected at very high sample frequencies, typically over 10 times a second, so 10 hertz or more.
Okay, so getting the raw feed, how is that different from older devices?
Well, older devices often did a lot of onboard processing. They'd kind of pre-interpret the data, maybe count steps internally or calculate some activity score before the researcher even got their hands on it.
So it's like getting the raw camera footage instead of the edited movie.
Precisely. The big push for raw data was really about gaining analytical freedom and transparency. When a device pre-processes everything, you get the result, the what, but you often lose the how. You don't see the algorithms or assumptions baked in.
Right.
Raw data, though, it just opens up huge possibilities. Researchers can apply their own sophisticated custom algorithms. They can ask new questions, explore subtleties that, pre-processed data might just smooth over or miss entirely.
Okay, but that sounds like a bit of a paradox, doesn't it? This freedom is great for innovation. Let scientists dig deeper. But if everyone can process it differently, aren't we just creating more ways for things to be inconsistent between different studies, different brands?
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head. That's the core challenge. This analytical freedom, while really powerful, has a direct impact on methodological consistency. And comparability is just, it's vital for science. Imagine trying to compare activity levels across different countries, or tracking how patients respond to treatment over time, or even just looking at public health trends.
Yeah, if the basic measurement isn't consistent,
then those comparisons become shaky, unreliable. You're just not comparing apples to apples anymore.
Now, you might think, okay, this sounds like a technical problem just for scientists in labs. But the reality, as these experts pointed out, is much broader. There's a whole ecosystem of players involved in trying to make this harmonization happen.
Absolutely. It's like a web. At the center, you've got maybe 3 core groups. First, the sensor manufacturers. These are the companies actually engineering and building the devices, in names like Genia, Geniactive, Axivity, Actigraph were mentioned in the paper. They make the hardware.
Okay.
Second, you have the algorithm developers. These are the minds behind turning that raw stream of acceleration data into something meaningful. Could be steps, activity types like walking or running, maybe estimates of energy expenditure.
The translators, in a way?
Kind of, yeah. And third, you have the method end users. These are the researchers, the clinicians out there actually applying these tools in their studies, maybe looking for links between activity and, say, heart disease or tracking population health.
And it doesn't stop there, right? There are
That's
others involved too.
Definitely. You've got indirect but influential players, the funding bodies deciding which research gets supported, the scientific journal setting publication standards, even platforms emerging for sharing data and algorithms. Everyone really has a stake in this.
So, given how important this is and how many people are involved, why isn't harmonization simple? Why can't we just, I don't know, pick the best device or the best algorithm and say everyone use this?
Well, that raises a really critical point. Achieving that kind of consistency is incredibly complex, mainly because there's already so much diversity out there, both in the methods used and the specific needs of different studies. Think about it. What works perfectly for a study on, say, elite athletes measuring high-impact movements might be totally unsuitable for research on older adults who have limited mobility.
Right, different context, different requirements.
Exactly. So the experts acknowledged, simply picking one best method is pretty unrealistic. Practical needs differ too much. And maybe even more crucially, you don't want to stifle future innovation by freezing development in place. This field is moving fast.
And there's also a kind of real-world tension, isn't there, between, say, the commercial companies making these devices and the researchers using them?
There can be. Companies, quite understandably, need to protect their intellectual property, their investments, ensure they can make a profit. And this can sometimes limit how much detail they share about the inner workings of their sensors or algorithms.
Which can feel like a black box to a researcher trying to understand the data.
It can. And it's important to say, not fully transparent doesn't automatically mean worse data or a bad product. Especially for end users who maybe don't have the resources to do all the complex processing themselves, commercial services can be very efficient. But for the scientific community to really understand, compare, and properly apply the data, a certain level of disclosure is essential. Researchers need to make informed decisions about the tools they're using and what the output actually represents.
Okay, so it's complicated. Given all that, what did these experts actually propose? Let's get into the practical steps, the action points for improving consistency. They broke it down into about 5 key areas, didn't they? Starting right at the source, the hardware itself.
Exactly. You used the car analogy earlier, trying to compare cars without knowing the engine. It's spot on. With hardware, the challenge is that different brands use different sensor components, different designs. So what's actually being measured and how precisely isn't always clear just from looking at the device.
So what's the fix?
The experts called for manufacturers to essentially open up the hood, provide detailed specifications for their sensors.
What kind of detail are we talking? Like really technical stuff?
Pretty granular, yeah. Things like the specific type of sensor. Is it a triaxial MEMS accelerometer? Which company made the chip? What's its model number? Also, what are the possible sampling frequencies? What's the data resolution like? 12-bit over a 16G range? What's that dynamic range? Are there any filters or other processing happening right on the chip? Researchers need these performance specs.
And just listing specs isn't enough, presumably.
Right. They also emphasize the need for manufacturers to provide proper test reports, show how the sensor's output compares to known calibrated reference signals, and importantly, how new versions of their sensors compare to older ones. It's about defining and proving the performance.
Okay, so that's clarifying what's inside the box. But then the next big area of variability comes from how we use the box, right? How researchers set up their studies. Things like sampling frequency, where you wear it, for how long.
Yeah.
There are so many choices.
A huge source of variation. The experts' proposal here wasn't necessarily to dictate one single protocol because, again, needs vary. Instead, they suggested harmonization could come from requiring researchers to clearly motivate their choices in their publications.
So justify why you picked, say, 100 Hz sampling instead of 50, or why you chose the wrist instead of the hip.
Exactly. Explain the rationale. This forces a scientific discussion about the strengths and weaknesses of those choices. The idea is that configurations with weak justifications would naturally become less common over time, pushing the whole field towards more rigorous, well-thought-out protocols.
And they provided some practical help too, like a checklist.
Yes, a minimum checklist for reporting the operational procedures. It covers things you might expect, like recording the exact body location, the attachment method used, but also crucial details like what instructions did participants get about wearing it at night? Or during water activities, documenting participant characteristics like whether they're right or left-handed, which could affect wrist placement,
Right.
and practical checks, ensuring the data collected matches the planned duration, checking the device housing for damage, cleaning procedures, battery charging protocols, making sure the device was configured correctly. It's about meticulous documentation of the how.
Right, leaving no stone unturned. Okay, next up, data processing and algorithms. This feels like where the raw data really gets turned into insight, but also maybe where a lot of inconsistency creeps in.
Definitely a critical stage. Things like basic data management, how you handle potential sensor malfunctions, or crucially, how you identify and deal with periods when the person simply wasn't wearing the device. These steps are often done differently by different groups and sometimes not even reported clearly.
So what are the action points here?
Two core things really stood out. First, echoing the point about protocols, every single computational step within an algorithm needs to be documented and motivated. Researchers should explain not just what calculation they did, but why they chose that specific method. And second, a big one, when new algorithms are developed and considered ready for application, that it should be shared openly with the community.
Shared how? Just the general idea.
No, shared fully. That means the complete algorithm, including any specific parameters or coefficients needed to run it, not just, say, the code used to train the algorithm initially on a specific data set. The goal is to allow other researchers to replicate the findings, evaluate the algorithm independently on their own data, and really build collective trust and understanding.
And again, they offered a checklist to help make this happen.
Yes, a checklist for reporting the data processing steps. It includes things like clearly identifying the algorithm's source and developer, reporting all the parameters and coefficient values used, describing the programming environment it runs in, and providing a clear written description and justification for the key steps, citing supporting literature where possible. It really boils down to moving away from these black box solutions.
Makes sense. Pushing for transparency, reproducibility, so everyone can see how those wiggles on the graph become something like moderate activity minutes.
Precisely.
Okay, number 4 is maybe a bit more subtle, but sounds equally important. Data description. What's the issue here?
This is about the level of detail used when describing the data, both the raw data context and the processed output. It sounds simple, but inconsistency here can be really problematic. Think about your example earlier. Is sitting just sitting, or was it measured while someone was specifically sitting and instructed not to move in a lab? That difference, while seemingly small, could fundamentally change how you interpret results comparing it to free-living sitting.
The context is key. So how do we harmonize that? Do we need standardized labels for everything?
Not necessarily standardized labels for every single nuance. The focus here is more on completeness of description and, crucially, explicitly stating the known uncertainties. Let's take an algorithm that classifies activity into walking. Okay, fine. But was that algorithm trained and validated using data from, say, healthy adults walking on a flat, level surface wearing shoes indoors? As opposed to someone walking uphill, or on uneven ground, or barefoot, or a child walking, or an elderly person with a different gait. These factors matter. The description of the algorithm's output, that label walking, needs to reflect what the paper called consequential vagueness. It needs to acknowledge the context it was derived from and the inherent uncertainty when applying it more broadly. Without that context, walking can be a misleadingly simple label.
That really resonates. It connects back to you, our listener, doesn't it? When you see your own activity data or read about a study, understanding that context, what kind of walking, what kind of sitting, it matters hugely. Knowing these underlying details can totally change how you interpret what the numbers mean.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the 5th and final area they tackled was method evaluation and ongoing development. Basically, how do we test these methods and keep improving them?
Right. They discuss the different ways methods get developed and tested. You have things like robot experiments that can produce perfectly repeatable movements, controlled lab studies with human participants doing specific tasks, and then real-world free-living studies. Each approach has its own strengths and, importantly, its own weaknesses.
So do we need to standardize how we test them too?
Interestingly, the experts suggested that a lack of complete harmonization in the experimental designs used for testing can actually be a good thing. It means methods get challenged by a wider variety of conditions, which helps uncover their limitations. However, when you're doing a direct head-to-head comparison between two different methods, that needs to be done under standardized, fair conditions. You need that level playing field to see which one performs better under those specific circumstances.
And how do we keep this whole field moving forward collaboratively?
A big emphasis was placed on fostering dynamic interaction between the stakeholders, the developers, the users, the manufacturers, things like workshops, conferences, online forums where people can share findings, debate methods, and collaborate. They also
Wow,
pointed out the role of funding bodies and journals in actively supporting not just the application of these methods, but the crucial work of developing and evaluating them too.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Investing in the tools themselves.
Exactly. And one final point they stressed was the importance, whenever feasible, of reporting results using both a new method and an established older method in the same study. This provides a bridge, allowing for better comparisons over time and across populations as methods evolve. It helps us understand how findings using newer techniques relate to historical data.
Okay, fantastic. So let's just quickly bring those 5 key action points together again. To really tackle this challenge of harmonizing raw accelerometry data, the experts called for. 1. Manufacturers need to provide those detailed sensor specifications. Open the hood. 2. Every fundamental step in an algorithm needs clear documentation and justification. No more black boxes.
Right. Transparency.
3. Developers and users need to be upfront about the uncertainties. What are the limitations? What's the context?
Crucial.
4. New algorithms ready for prime time should be shared openly with the community for replication and evaluation.
Build that trust.
And 5. Keep the conversation going. Encourage continuous dynamic interaction between everyone involved, manufacturers, researchers, funders, journals.
Collaboration is key.
So this deep dive has really shown us, I think, just how critical this harmonization effort is in accelerometry research. We've explored the challenges, the diversity, the transparency issues, but also these really practical, concrete steps proposed by the experts. It's clearly a complex, multifaceted problem, but getting it right is absolutely vital if we want robust scientific insights into physical activity and its huge impact on our health.
Absolutely. And, while achieving perfect, complete consistency might be a moving target, especially with ongoing innovation and the need to compare with older data, the experts did offer a really important piece of practical advice. They strongly discourage trying to retrospectively convert data processed with old methods into estimates from new methods. That often just adds another layer of error and uncertainty.
So what's the alternative?
Whenever possible, reanalyze the original raw data using the newer, improved methods. Go back to the source. That avoids compounding errors and gives you a much more reliable basis for comparison across different studies and time periods.
That makes a lot of sense. Go back to the raw footage, so to speak. Well, this deep dive really underscores something fundamental, doesn't it? The way data is collected, processed, described. It profoundly shapes what we ultimately learn from it. So for you, our listener, whether you're digging into a complex research paper or just glancing at your own fitness tracker stats, maybe take a moment to think about those underlying methods, understanding the choices made, the potential uncertainties. It's key. It's not just about the final numbers, but the whole story behind them and what those numbers truly represent in their specific context. So here's a final thought. How might knowing all this change the way you interpret health information or even look at your own personal activity data in the future?